Poor black Maid whispered to the billionaire, "Don't sign this." What he did next surprised everyone. What happens when a young maid, driven by a desire to protect her dreams, stops a billionaire from making a deal that could cost lives and legacies? And what if that same maid, in offering him a simple piece of advice, changes the course of her own life forever? The rain hadn't let up for hours, turning the mansion's long driveway into a stream of gray. Keisha Harris, 29, moved through the grand halls with the practiced grace of someone who'd spent years polishing silver, scrubbing marble floors, and keeping chaos at bay behind the scenes. Her dark curls were pinned back, her uniform worn from countless washes, the faint scent of bleach still clinging to the fabric. She was used to the late hours, the endless tasks, the condescending remarks from guests who barely noticed her presence. But tonight felt heavier. Her mother Laverne had had a bad day, her lupus flaring up again. The medical bills were piling up faster than Keisha could scrape together cash, and the weight of it all pressed against her chest like a stone. The estate where she worked was a relic in its own way, gold-framed paintings fading on the walls, chandeliers missing a few crystals, carpets that no longer gleamed no matter how hard she scrubbed. The grandeur was still there, but worn thin. Keisha glanced at the grandfather clock in the corner. 11:47 p.m. Just a few more hours and she could collapse into bed before starting it all over again. The heavy oak doors creaked open and Keisha looked up, expecting one of the late returning guests. Instead, a man in a soaked wool coat stepped inside, his presence sharp against the mansion's dim charm. He was tall, with sharp cheekbones and dark hair slicked back from the rain. His suit screamed money, but his face, pale, drawn with shadows under his eyes, told a different story. He strode toward the study and settled by the tall window, pulling a tablet and thick folder from his briefcase. Keisha, balancing a tray she hadn't yet cleared, lingered by the doorway watching. His hands trembled slightly as he sifted through papers dense with numbers and legal jargon. A headline caught her eye: Davenport Holdings poised for hostile takeover of Orion Technologies. She didn't know much about business, but she knew Orion Technologies. Her father, Samuel, had founded it decades ago, before his death when she was just a kid. The company had been his dream, a way to use technology to bridge gaps, not widen them. Now, it was just another name in a headline about to be swallowed by someone like this man. She turned away, but something about him kept her glancing back. He wasn't just stressed. He looked broken, like he was carrying a weight as heavy as her own. Keisha hadn't always been this tired. Growing up, she'd been a dreamer, sketching designs for apps that could help kids like her. Kids from rough neighborhoods with big ideas but no way to make them real. Her father had encouraged her, telling her stories of how Orion would change the world. But when Samuel died in a car accident when Keisha was 12, everything shifted. Laverne's lupus worsened and Keisha's dreams were shelved. She dropped out of college to work, first cleaning houses, then securing a full-time maid position at the mansion. Every dollar went to bills, medicine, or keeping the lights on. Her strength came from her mother. Laverne, even on her worst days, carried a quiet resilience Keisha clung to. "We don't break, baby," Laverne would say, her voice raspy but firm. "We bend, but we don't break." Keisha lived by those words, even when she felt like she was one bad day from shattering. But there was another side to Keisha, one she kept buried. She was angry. Angry at the world for taking her father, for making her mother suffer, for trapping her in a life where survival was the only goal. That anger simmered beneath her calm exterior, flaring up when wealthy guests treated her like furniture, or when her uncle Leon showed up with his schemes. Leon was Laverne's brother, a small-time hustler who always had a sure thing that never panned out. Keisha tolerated Leon for her mother's sake, but she didn't trust him. Not after he'd borrowed money from her and never paid it back. Tonight, that anger felt closer to the surface. Maybe it was the rain, or the ache in her feet, or the sight of that headline about Orion Technologies. Whatever it was, it made her pause when she dusted the side table near the study, her eyes lingering on the man's tablet. Alexander Davenport, 38, was a name that carried weight. CEO of Davenport Holdings. He'd built an empire from the ground up, taking over his father's modest investment firm and turning it into a juggernaut. He was known for his ruthlessness, his ability to close deals that others couldn't. But tonight he felt like a fraud. The Orion takeover was supposed to be his crowning achievement, a move that would cement his legacy. Instead, it was unraveling. Shareholders were wavering. The media was sniffing around. And Alexander's own conscience, something he'd long ignored, was gnawing at him. Alexander's father, Walter, had been a different kind of man. A small-town investor who valued people over profits. Walter had taught his son to do right by others. But Walter died when Alexander was 25, and the lessons faded as he climbed the corporate ladder. Now sitting in the dimly lit study of the estate, Alexander felt further from his father's values than ever. The Orion deal would destroy a company that had once been a beacon of innovation, but it would make Alexander untouchable. He needed this win. His board was circling, waiting for him to falter. His marriage had crumbled years ago. His daughter barely spoke to him, and his life felt like a house of cards ready to collapse. He stared at the tablet, the contract glowing on the screen. One signature and it was done. So why couldn't he do it? Keisha was polishing the brass handles on the cabinet when she glanced at Alexander again. He was muttering to himself, his fingers hovering over the tablet. She didn't know why she cared, but something about him reminded her of her mother on her worst days, trapped, fighting a battle no one else could see. Before she could stop herself, she stepped closer. "Sir, do you need anything?" she asked softly, cloth still in her hand. He shook his head, eyes still locked on the screen. "No, I'm good." She hesitated, then blurted it out. "Don't sign this." Alexander's head snapped up, his eyes narrowing. "What?" Keisha's heart raced. She shouldn't have said anything. This wasn't her place. But the words were out and she couldn't take them back. "I saw the headline. Orion Technologies. You're about to ruin something good. Don't do it." Alexander stared at her, incredulous. "You don't even know me or what this is." "I know enough," she said, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her. "I know what it's like to fight for something and lose it anyway. Whatever's on that screen, it's not worth it if it's tearing you up like this." For a moment, neither spoke. The rain drummed against the tall windows, the only sound in the study. Alexander's jaw tightened, but he didn't look away. There was something in her eyes, honesty maybe or pain, that hit him harder than he expected. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice quieter now. "Keisha," she said simply. "Just Keisha." Over the next hour, the mansion stayed quiet, and Keisha found herself talking to Alexander. It started small, offering him tea, asking if he wanted a blanket to dry off. But soon she was telling him about her life, about Laverne's lupus, the bills that kept coming, the dreams she'd buried. She didn't know why she was opening up to a stranger, but something about him made her feel like he was listening. Really listening. Alexander, in turn, surprised himself by talking back. He told her about the pressure of running a company, the loneliness of a life built on power. He didn't mention his father, but Keisha's story stirred memories of Walter. His laughter, his belief in doing right. For the first time in years, Alexander felt like someone saw him, not just his title. "You ever think about walking away?" Keisha asked, leaning lightly against the doorframe. "From all of it?" Alexander laughed, a bitter sound. "Every day. But it's not that simple." "Maybe it is," she said. "Maybe you just need a reason." Her words stayed with him, echoing in his mind as he stared at the contract. He didn't sign it that night. Instead, he quietly closed the tablet, slipped it back into his briefcase, and with a faint nod in Keisha's direction, left the study. The next evening, Alexander returned to the estate later than usual, rain dripping from his coat as he stepped inside. Keisha was surprised to see him lingering in the study again, instead of disappearing upstairs as he usually did. She didn't show it, but something about his presence felt different this time. Lighter, less guarded. They talked again, and over the next few days, a fragile bond began to form. Alexander started to see Keisha not just as a maid, but as someone with a strength he envied. She, in turn, saw glimpses of a man who wasn't as cold as the world believed. One evening, Alexander mentioned Orion Technologies' history, how its founder had been a visionary. Keisha froze, her hand tightening around the silver tray she carried. "You mean Samuel Harris?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Alexander nodded. "Yeah, brilliant guy. Died too young." Keisha's heart pounded. She hadn't told Alexander her last name. "He was my father," she said, the words spilling out before she could stop them. Alexander stared, stunned. "Your father?" She nodded, her eyes glistening. "He built Orion to help people, not to make money. After he died, it was sold off to people who didn't care. And now you're finishing what they started." Alexander felt like the ground had shifted beneath him. Keisha wasn't just a maid. She was the daughter of the man whose legacy he was about to destroy. And her words, "Don't sign this," weren't just a plea. They were a call to protect something sacred. As Keisha and Alexander grew closer, a shadow from her past reappeared. Her uncle Leon showed up at the estate one evening, his smile too wide, his eyes too sharp. He'd heard about the wealthy man Keisha had been seen talking to, and he saw an opportunity. "Keisha, baby," he said, leaning against the gate. "You got a chance to make things right for us. Get close to this Davenport guy. Find out what he's planning. We could use that info." Keisha's stomach churned. "I'm not doing that, Leon. He's not like you think." Leon's smile faded. "You owe me, girl. I've been there for you and your mama. Don't forget that." Keisha wanted to scream. Leon had never been there. Not really. He'd taken money, made promises he never kept. But he was family, and that word carried weight. She felt trapped, torn between her loyalty to Laverne and her growing trust in Alexander. Alexander, meanwhile, was wrestling with his own demons. Keisha's revelation about her father changed everything. He dug into Orion's history and found evidence of corruption, how Samuel's partners had pushed him out before his death, how the company had been gutted for profit. The more Alexander learned, the angrier he became. Not just at the system but at himself for being part of it. He made a decision. Instead of signing the deal, he called an emergency board meeting and laid out the truth. He proposed scrapping the takeover and investing in Orion to restore its original mission. The board was furious, threatening to oust him. But Alexander stood firm, Keisha's words echoing in his mind. "Maybe you just need a reason." The fallout was swift. Davenport Holdings stock plummeted, and investors pulled out. But the media caught wind of Alexander's stand, and the public rallied behind him. Hashtags like #SaveOrion trended, and Alexander became an unlikely hero. Back at the estate, Keisha faced her own reckoning. Leon pushed harder, threatening to tell Laverne that Keisha had turned against the family. Keisha finally snapped. "You don't get to use me anymore," she said, her voice shaking but strong. "I'm done." She went to the police with evidence of Leon's illegal dealings, documents she'd found in his car years ago but never had the courage to use. Leon was arrested and Keisha felt a weight lift. For the first time she was free. With the takeover halted, Alexander reached out to Keisha. He offered her a role at Orion Technologies, not as a token gesture but because he believed in her. "Your father's vision needs you," he said. "And I think you're ready." Keisha hesitated. She wasn't a businesswoman. She was a maid. But then she thought of her mother, of her father, of all the people like her who deserved a chance. She accepted, stepping into a world she'd never imagined. Together, Keisha and Alexander rebuilt Orion Technologies, focusing on projects that empowered underserved communities. Keisha launched a program to teach coding to kids from low-income neighborhoods, giving them the tools her father had once dreamed of. Alexander, for his part, found purpose in using his wealth for good. He wasn't perfect, none of them were, but he was trying. One day, as Keisha stood in her new office, looking out over the city, she found a letter tucked inside her father's old files. It was addressed to her, written days before his death. "Keisha," it read, "the world will try to break you but you're stronger than you know. Keep fighting for what's right and you'll light the way for others." Tears spilled down her cheeks as she clutched the letter. She'd always thought her father's legacy was Orion. But now she understood, it was her. Her courage, her heart, her refusal to give up. And as she looked out at the city skyline, she knew she was just getting started. Alexander, too, found peace. He'd lost much of his fortune, but he'd gained something better, purpose. And in Keisha, he'd found a friend, maybe more, who reminded him of the man he could still become. The rain had stopped, and the Davenport estate was quieter now. Keisha no longer walked its halls with a maid's uniform, but she visited sometimes, bringing Laverne along to sit in the garden or share tea in the parlor. The house hadn't changed much. But Keisha had. She was a leader, a dreamer, a beacon for others. And as she sat with her mother, laughing over old stories, she knew one thing for sure. She had bent, but she hadn't broken. And neither had the world. Not yet.